Welcome to the Emerging Biotech Leader, where we help biotech leaders maximize the value of their therapeutics from translational development to product launch. We're your hosts. I'm Kim Kushner.
And I'm Ramin Farhood. We are here to help you navigate the pitfalls of the biotech industry and illuminate the path forward.
Welcome to today's episode of the Emerging Biotech Leader. I'm so glad to welcome Jill Milne, the CEO of Astria Therapeutics, to today's conversation. In our discussion today, we're going to be covering three key themes, talking about developing medicines with your patients first and foremost at mind, creating a corporate culture that's really a strategic advantage in such a competitive environment, and how to bring the board along in building the business case to do the first and second thing really well. So Jill, thank you so much for joining today. If you wouldn't mind, would love to hear a little bit more about your background.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, thanks for hosting me today. It's really a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk with you. And so maybe I'll start with introducing myself. I'm a Ph.D. scientist turned CEO with now 25 years of biotech and pharma experience. I'd say I'm personally driven by a passion for translating science into meaningful outcomes for patients. I started my career in large pharma at Pfizer. I went on to help launch three startup companies and have led in the CEO role both private and public companies over this past 17 years, always with a focus on building teams and strategies that keep patients at the center of everything we do.
That's incredible. And through those experiences, Jill, what has been the central theme that's made you want to stay in the startup founder kind of world?
Yeah, I mean, it's truly, I think, the passion to make a difference and to make a difference for people living with disease. And I found that in the case of biotech, you have the opportunity really to do that and to live it and breathe it every day.
Absolutely. And one thing that we've talked about in the past, you and I, is about how you've been very intentional about putting the patient voice first, specifically at Astria, but in your prior roles as well. This has been a personal passion for you and a critical theme in how you've designed organizations that you've worked for. So maybe we can dig in a little bit there to start and talk about how have you thought about putting patients first at the core of your corporate strategy from company initiation through driving your studies?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, well, first, maybe I'll tell you just briefly about Astria. And so, our focus at Astria, which you well know, is to develop first choice products that improve the health and outcomes of people living with allergic and immunologic diseases. And first choice for us means that patients and physicians choose our products first. Our mission is to transform science that works into products that patients truly want. And at the heart of that strategy is understanding deeply what patients want. And that's really certainly what we've built Astria around and what I've really centered on throughout my career in biotech and pharma. I'd say in terms of patient-centered strategy, at Astria, patients are our North Star. The name Astria is the Greek word for star, and patients really are at the center of everything we do. They're the stars that guide us. Patient needs really shape how we think, how we prioritize, how we act, and that's across every function at the company. And this commitment for us goes beyond rare diseases. It spans the full pipeline. And that's reflecting our belief that first choice therapies come from understanding what truly matters to patients. As we've talked about before at Astria, we're not satisfied with being first in class. Our ambition is to be best. And we want to translate cutting edge science into products that patients actively choose because those products work better, make the patients feel better, and importantly, fit better into their lives. And I'll tell you what we've focused on is having that patient-driven strategy go end to end. And what I mean by that is patient experiences, outcomes, insights inform how we assemble our pipeline, how we do clinical development, and ultimately how we go to market. end to end, start to finish. We want to have patients at the center of all of our thinking around that. And for me, that represents really a shift from the historic model. From the early days when I started my career more than 25 years ago, patients then were considered really as clinical trial subjects. And that's certainly evolved to today, and certainly where we are at Astria is patients are active partners in this whole process, and that is a fundamental shift, and it's certainly how we operate at Astria.
That's incredibly helpful to hear, and I appreciate how you're thinking about designing the company. One theme that we're hearing across the industry is everyone's kind of talking about patient voice and getting the patient part of the process. We hear it most frequently in the rare and the ultra rare disease spaces, but you specifically called out the point. It's not only for subsets. We really need to have the patient voice, and just being, first in class doesn't mean you're necessarily the best or the best option for the patient. And so I find it really fascinating to hear how you're tackling larger disease states with that patient voice and that patient preference at the core. So maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that and how you've thought of it differently in these larger disease states.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm convinced, as well as, everyone here at Astria, is that having a better understanding of the patient need, really will help us make the best products for those patients. And starting early in the process is important. And importantly, I think one of the most common myths I hear is that a patient-centered strategy is only for rare diseases. Absolutely not. Right. I think we can do better for patients by truly understanding what the needs are, no matter what the disease is. And, the way I like to think about this strategy is a patient-driven pyramid, if you will. And at the foundation of that pyramid for us is a deep understanding of the patient. And that's whether it's a rare disease or a very large indication like atopic dermatitis, which is an area that we're in as well. And as at that foundation of the pyramid, understanding the patient. And we invest in understanding the full patient journey, not just during the treatment phase for that patient, but across the lived experience. This includes understanding the caregivers, the providers, the broader support system. And then above that foundation, the middle of the pyramid is the strategic integration of that foundational work that we've done with patients, where we translate those insights from patients into real decisions and a real program plan. And that's whether it's developing patient-relevant endpoints, refining a target product profile, and also prioritizing what has the potential for the greatest impact for the patient, that the patients that we're trying to serve. And then importantly, at the top of the pyramid is really where it gets important, the real execution for the program. And what we try to do is bring patients in early and often. And consistently, from the time we select a program to the design of the clinical trial protocol to launch planning, we want to build ongoing opportunities for meaningful partnership and not just input at the beginning and then we forget about it, but throughout that process. And that's both rare and non-rare diseases.
Absolutely. Jill, how do you tangibly do that so that you don't over-index on one patient's point of view or one lived experience, which might be different in New York City versus rural Kansas versus, who knows where else? How do you make sure that you're not just zoning in on one person's point of view?
Yeah, absolutely. You certainly have to take a broad view and you have to understand different aspects that influence a single patient's view. And so we don't just take a single patient or small numbers of patients. We talk broadly to patients around the world when we are planning a program and developing a therapy. We also importantly talk to physicians, those who are interacting with the patients and also are hearing the lived experience of the patients. So it's the patients, it's the physicians, and it's also, in the case of many diseases, even non-rare diseases, it's talking to patient advocacy groups who represent the patient populations as well. And to get a broad, as best as we can, 360 view of that patient lived experience so that we can use that information to influence how we design our target product profile, how we design the development of that product from a clinical perspective, and then ultimately how we're going to bring it to them commercially.
Yeah. To take that a step further, let's dig in a little bit more about how you get the patients to the table. So you mentioned that Astria is focusing on atopic dermatitis. I know you're also working on HAE, which is a fairly competitive therapeutic area in our industry at this point in time. How are you competing for mind share of patients who inevitably others are looking for their point of views as well? How are you differentiating Astria in those conversations? How are you making sure that you're top of mind to provide that feedback and be part of the development cycle with them?
Yeah, I think for us, it's all about consistent engagement and building trust. And also transparency into how we think and how we operate as a company. And I think that enhances our ability to build that trust with the patient community and the treating physicians. And I'd say one thing that I think sets us apart is how early we engage in the patient community and the physician community around a program. For instance, with our atopic dermatitis program, the OX40 program, when we licensed that about a year and a half ago, at the time we were evaluating that particular mechanism for atopic dermatitis. At that time, our pipeline strategy team has a patient advocacy person that sits on the team. Because we want that voice represented in how we think and evaluate programs. Like, do we think if we worked in this space that we could make a product that could meet the current needs of the patients, the needs today and then in the future from what we know that's going on. And so I think that does set us apart. And I think for us, it's also about that consistency. It's not just engaging at one point to get input. It's a consistent engagement and dialogue with these different communities to understand how to develop our product in the best way possible.
Absolutely. That trust component is such a critical piece, especially in our industry where I think we're probably in the top 3 to 4 industries that people unfortunately do not like. And we have, terrible reputation more broadly, but it really is built on establishing that trust that we really are looking to bring new medicines to patients that really need them. And unfortunately, everyone around us is a patient in some capacity. And so we need to find really thoughtful ways to garner that trust as much as we can.
Absolutely.
As we think about this trust component, it also translates to how you build your team and making sure that they are being good stewards and representatives of that strategy and that desire to really bring the patient really close. Can you talk a little bit about the culture that you've established at Astria and what differentiates that to be able to achieve those goals?
Yeah, and certainly at Astria, culture is a strategic asset for us. How we operate, I often say this, how we operate is as important as what we do and why we do it. And in the competitive biotech landscape, like the one that we're in today, our culture can set us apart and help us attract top talent, unite a team around a common purpose, but importantly also keep us grounded in what matters most, the patients we serve. And, for us, we're deeply committed to serving people living with allergic and immunologic diseases. And that commitment is woven throughout our culture. I think you may have heard our motto that we say a lot internally. It's patients first, people always. It's a simple motto. But it's not just a tagline. It's the standard that we hold ourselves to every day. And I think for me, it's important to understand how you put culture into action in a company, because it is crucially important. And for us, that patient-centered strategy and making that an important part of our culture has been really important. We bring the patient voice into everything, and whether that's from the early days in research to regulatory, from commercial to finance, patient centricity isn't like a single department at Astria. It's not just medical affairs. It's not just patient advocacy. It's a shared mindset. It's a collective responsibility of every person who makes up the Astria team. And I'll give you an example. It's important to us as an organization that when we go to scientific meetings, when we go to patient advocacy meetings, we want representatives across the Astria team to participate. So whether it's someone from finance, someone from the CMC team, to go to understand more about the patient and the needs and what we're trying to do, to understand how their function can impact this patient community. And that's been a really important thing for us as a company. We regularly integrate patient stories into our meetings. We host patient speakers. We ensure every employee connects their role to that patient impact. And I'll say another thing for us that I think sets us apart and differentiates us is we treat our partners, so the CROs we work with, the manufacturing organizations we work with, as an extension of that culture and that patient centricity. And an example I'll give, just last week, we had the opportunity to host 2 patients at our manufacturing partner site, and hearing firsthand how the therapy that they were working on and producing for us could change lives. You could just see the inspiration around the room. I mean, it was incredible. And, that goes to culture travels, culture scales. And it's important to us, not only our Astria team members who, sit at Astria, but that extended team that we work with, the CROs, the manufacturing facilities, to also have that passion for what we're trying to do. And that was a really inspirational opportunity. And we were told that was the first time this manufacturing facility had brought in patients to speak to the people working on the programs. And I think that's a great thing. And I'm sure it gives those individuals also that really fresh look at what they're doing and how it can have a positive impact. I think the other thing, we talk about a lot at Astria is having a team first philosophy. And for me, I do think great results come from great teams. As I grew up playing a lot of team sports, and I've certainly seen how putting a team ahead of individuals can unlock performance, certainly enhance resilience, and also enhance creativity. And so that's something that's critically important to us. And we intentionally, our decision making is collaborative. I wouldn't say we seek consensus for the sake of seeking consensus, but what we're trying to do is to ensure that we get diverse perspectives to inform our decisions. We want the best possible decisions, and I do believe that is at the core of a solid team. And so, certainly culture is really critical.
Absolutely. You're driving a lot of the change management by bringing everyone along in the decision making itself, rather than waiting until after the decision is made and then communicating it down. So it's a little bit of a different way of doing it, but I've certainly seen it work incredibly well to bring those teams together. On the flip side of that, and I'm interested in your perspective here, what I find in very team first organizations is one misfire on a hire, or the person that doesn't necessarily fit what you're trying to really accomplish can drag the entire team down. So how do you think about the hiring process and making sure that people are really fit for team in this situation so that you can really accelerate a lot of the impact that these teams are having?
Yeah, you make a very good point. And I think part of it is embedding that culture intentionally. And so making it part of how you recruit to fill positions, make it part of how you onboard employees, and also make it part of how you develop employees and reward employees. And, I'd like to say, we get it right 100% of the times. You don't always. And
Nobody does.
yeah. And then you have to address it. But it's important to have a team that is, has a shared purpose and also fits that same patients first, people always mentality.
Yeah. Are you doing anything unique to incentivize that kind of culture or teaming environment within the organization?
We have a couple of initiatives that run through the organization to keep that aspect of our culture alive and being talked about and thought about. There's one we call the Bridge Initiative, which, bridges are a powerful symbol of connection. And for us, that connection is critically important when you are trying to build that team first philosophy. Yep. And so that runs through the organization, has representatives across all functions participating in it, and to keep it alive and keep it top of mind for people. And I'll say we have a really intentional and thorough onboarding process where people learn about the culture. Right. They learn about our corporate strategy. They learn about this patient-first mentality. And so that's important to us that we do that well, so not only when we're recruiting people, but importantly, when we get them here and we're onboarding, and then to maintain that so it's something they're hearing about and thinking about.
Yeah. One piece of insight that I constantly hear from CEOs is, I want to be patient first. I want to have an award-winning culture. I can't invest the time and money to do that well or do it right now. I'll get to it eventually. And we know when you say eventually, it's never going to happen, or it's too late in the company formation and really laying the groundwork of what the organization is going to accomplish. And so what are your thoughts on how to engage the board and engage your investors on why it's so critically important to invest up front to build it this way to start so that you can reap the benefits long term? Like, how have you dealt with that?
Yeah. So first, I'll start with, I agree. I think for emerging small companies, lean companies, it can be hard to think about investing in sort of that patient-centered approach. But honestly, that sort of culture aspect, it doesn't require a big budget. I think there are easy wins that you can have that don't cost big dollars, or they certainly require some time to invest for individuals. But there, I'd say, you start with advocacy and patient advocacy, and whether it's a rare disease or a large disease, there are patient advocacy groups out there, and engage those groups early and often. And those groups will bring authenticity, they'll bring insight, they'll amplify that shared purpose of your team, and that's really important. And, one thing that we think about here as well is you train your teams also as part of your culture to go beyond just data. Patient-centric thinking means understanding lived experiences, not just endpoints, not just data points. And that's something that doesn't cost you anything. That's sort of part of how you think and operate and talk to your team members. And then one important thing, I would prioritize always depth over breadth, and especially in lean teams. Yep. A single meaningful patient interaction can be so much more valuable than just reading a dozen surveys that you've sponsored. And so there are things you can do for a small lean company to really embed that patient centricity. But I will say, I do think it's a smart strategy, but it also, I think, will create a stronger business. And I think that, that sells well with your board of directors, and also builds credibility and value with investors as well. Patient centricity, it's more than a moral imperative. It's, in my mind, it's a strategic multiplier. And when you embed patient centricity deeply into a company, it can drive measurable business impact across the whole biotech value chain. The probably 4 areas I'd say is, one, it can accelerate clinical development. We incorporate patient input in our product profiles and also in our clinical trial designs. And that has the effect of strengthening patient engagement. And when you have engaged patients, that can improve trial recruitment, retention, adherence, and hopefully that translates into faster timelines and, of course, then lower costs. And so you can't argue with that. I think also patient-informed trial designs can lead to fewer protocol amendments, more clinically meaningful outcomes that hopefully ultimately boost the success rate and also enhances your capital efficiency. And so, again, things that I think make good business sense. Yep. One thing that we're focused on as we're in phase 3 with our lead program is that patient-centricity can also strengthen commercial performance. If you think about it, therapies that are shaped by real-world patient insight, I think resonate more strongly with patients, prescribers, and payers. And that can enhance your product positioning. It can help you build more compelling value narratives, and I think also creates competitive differentiation at time you're launching and hopefully beyond that as well. There's also benefits from a regulatory market access perspective where patient-centered programs are more likely to earn expedited designations like fast track, breakthrough, because they meet a clear unmet need and they're clinically relevant for the population that you're trying to help. And I think also that patient evidence that you generate as part of this dialogue with patients, because you're doing the right things, asking the right questions in your studies, can also lead to stronger outcomes in health technology assessments and hopefully, ultimately give you an edge in payer negotiations. And that's especially important in crowded categories like the one that we're in with our lead program, hereditary angioedema. I think, the fourth thing I'll point to of why this makes good business sense is ultimately a patient-centric approach can really drive sustainability and value. And how I think about that is a purpose-driven culture, one that's centered on patient impact, I think attracts mission-aligned talent, it strengthens your employee engagement and builds organizational resilience. And one thing we all know is biotech is never a straight road. Right. There are always bumps and turns in the way, and having a strong purpose-driven team really will help you get through those bumps in the road and navigate it successfully, hopefully. And I do think companies also with authentic patient focus earn greater trust from regulators. I think credibility with investors as well, and certainly loyalty from advocacy groups. And all of those factors contribute to enterprise value, brand equity, strategic optionality. So, bottom line, patient centricity and culture, not soft ideas. I think force multipliers.
Yeah. I think that's the tagline that we need everyone in the industry to be, touting on bumper stickers. I really appreciate that point on authentic point of view on supporting patients. A lot of people say they're doing it, but aren't actually embedding it in their day-to-day. It's not core to their focus, and it's a very secondary or tertiary perspective in the organization. And it doesn't have that force multiplier effect that you're referring to. It's just kind of something that they check the box and say that they're going to do, and they're not getting that strategic advantage that you're really referring to.
Yeah.
Jill, can you give any advice to a new founder or new CEO? Maybe it's somebody who's taking their first CEO job ever, and they're trying to think about how they're going to build their organization, both in terms of getting the right talent at the table and how they're going to make sure that that patient voice is really core to building the organization. What kind of advice would you give one of these new leaders?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, being authentic, being clear with your vision and your mission and the values behind what you're trying to achieve. I think, all of us gravitated to this industry probably for the same reason, to really make a difference. And to make a difference in the lives of people living with the diseases that we're trying to address. And that's something that teams can get around and be motivated by. But you can't just you can't just say you've got this mission. You've got to live it. You've got to breathe it. You've got to show that it's embedded in your culture. And I think there's so many ways you can do that even on lean teams are important. And I think it's just constantly embedding that and reminding people and bringing that patient voice in early and often is important to making sure. And certainly as you build your team, looking for people who are driven by that purpose and are also of that patient mindset and team mindset and curious is important. So, team is critically important. I often say, there are three really key factors to building a successful company. One is you do have to have the science or the products that are ultimately going to make a difference. You've got to have the financial resources to do what you need to do for your programs when you need to do them. But importantly, the third is you need the team behind it that's going to make it happen. All three of those are critically important to making a successful company.
Amazing. Jill, this has been a really amazing conversation. You're going to wait until we send a bumper sticker to your house that specifically calls out culture and patient-centricity are force multipliers. I couldn't agree more, and I think it's a great piece of advice to everyone in the industry. So, Jill, thank you so much for the great conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Emerging Biotech Leader, an SSI strategy podcast. Join us each month for more conversations with biotech leaders. If you'd like to help navigating the complexities of biotech, reach out to our team at ssistrategy.com. Don't forget to hit subscribe and leave a review.